There is a couple of questions. I suggest that maybe we get to those questions in a little while when we have our intermission, so we can begin our journey for tonight, and then address those two questions and other questions in a moment. So as you may remember, we left off at the top of the mountain of Purgatory, and we didn't have quite enough time to finish the second canticle, because earthly paradise is really the third section of the canticle, and somehow a realm of its own. As you remember, Dante enters enters the realm of earthly paradise after crossing the wall of fire at the top of the mountain of Purgatory, and spending a night at the last of his nights on Purgatory, on the steps leading up to earthly paradise. So as you can see from this outline of the sequence, it's altogether 7 cantos, so it represents a sizable amount of the canticle as a whole. And a number of important events happen here. And somehow it works well that we look at these events also in connection with the third canticle, because there is essentially no access to the third leg of the journey, paradise, without this stopover in earthly paradise. And we need to understand what happens here and why this is so important for Dante the Wayfarer. So first of all, the moment Dante enters earthly paradise, he realizes he is in a place that he calls la divina foresta spessa e viva, so that the forest dense, alive with green and divine. And obviously the thing that he's asking us to do is to think back to the very beginning of the poem, which begins nella selva oscura, okay, in the dark forest. So immediately we realize that the journey has taken him to a different kind of forest. And most importantly, that it is that journey that has transformed his own way of looking at the world, so that he can actually now, at the end of this process, be readmitted into the divine forest of Eden. One sees there, the first person that he sees is Matilda, and Matilda is this sort of archetypal feminine figure who explains to him the nature of the place that he has arrived in. And she also mentions the fact that this place, this forest, is enlivened by 2 streams, which are actually 2 manifestations of the one and the same water. So she calls them by their name. She says to one side it is called Lethe, on the other it's called Eunoe. And she actually makes it very clear that there is no moving forward if both waters have not been tasted. And in particular, she mentions the fact that the savor of the second one, Eunoe, transcends all others. And she doesn't give any more details than this, but This is in fact an announcement of what is going to come afterwards. While Dante with Statius and Virgil are in this admiration of the forest, there is this procession that they begin to see and that comes towards them. And Purgatorio 29, in fact, describes in great detail the procession itself. We don't have the time to go into that detail, but at the center of the procession is a chariot, and on top of that chariot, Beatrice is standing. And so the moment Dante realizes that this procession is in fact the arrival of Beatrice, he immediately understands that this is happening. And so he turns around to tell Virgil, here comes Beatrice, and he realizes that Virgil is no longer there. So we have this very emotional moment in which Dante realizes that Virgil is gone. He starts crying, and that is the moment when Beatrice calls him by his name and says, Dante, stop crying for the disappearance of Virgil, because you're just about to cry for something much more important. And so here begins this fairly long episode. It lasts an entire canto, in which this encounter between Dante and Beatrice takes place, and the way in which it takes place is completely different from anything that we as reader could have expected, and certainly very different from what Dante would have hoped for. Beatrice essentially dresses down poor Dante, and his life and his shortcomings are exposed in this long speech that she gives to the angels and the maidens that are present around her. And the focus of all this is this accusation that we read at line 131-32 of Paradiso 30. Immagini di ben seguendo false, volse I passi suoi per via non vera, immagini di ben seguendo false che nulla promission rendono intera. In these three lines, everything is really encapsulated. And so Dante is really called at this moment, before he can move forward, to look at his existence in a way, in a completely different way, from the perspective of Beatrice, from the perspective of the divine, and see himself in that light. And sure enough, when he succeeds, the moment he succeeds in doing so, he faints. And so unbearable is this realization. So the realization, of course, triggers repentance. And with the repentance, Dante becomes overwhelmed with gratitude, riconoscenza, for all that Beatrice has done for him. And through this process, then Dante becomes ready to be immersed in the waters of the first river. So the waters of the river Lethe. Now, as some or many of you may remember, Lethe is one of the rivers of the classical ancient beyond, and it's the river of forgetfulness. So in being immersed in these waters, Dante is immersed in a liquid that will wash away all of the memories of the ways in which he strayed in his path. And Dante doesn't say this in a very explicit manner, but of course, the very ritual, the very gesture, it is Matilda who immerses him in the waters, is the ritual of baptism that takes place here. Following this, Dante, there is a second complex episode. We cannot again go into the details of that, but Dante sleeps without dreaming this time at the foot of the mystic tree that is at the center of earthly paradise. And once he awakens, he is shown the metamorphosis of the chariot. And in the following canto, Beatrice talks to him in a language that is, he says, Beatrice, I actually cannot understand a word of what you're saying. And she tells him, well, little by little, you will come to understand me better. This is just so that you understand how remote from divine language and divine mind the human mind is. And so there is this exchange between them where she says, everything has changed now, and you are entering this new dimension where your role is going to be that of becoming the scribe of what you see. And this is a theme that will, in fact, be repeated a number of times in Paradiso, but that finds its root, its beginning here. So we would think that this is the end of earthly paradise, but it's not the ending. There is still another element in this ritual that has to take place, and that is the immersion of Dante in the waters of the second river. So the river that Matilda called the Ghrough. Now, there is no trace of this term, of this name, for any of the rivers of classical antiquity. And so the only possibility is that Dante made up this name for this part of the river. And it's, of course, a name that is a Greek name in essence, even though we know that Dante didn't know any Greek. So what does the word Ghrough means? It's formed by two Greek words. One is eu, which means good or happy, and noe, which is the Latin transliteration or transformation of the Greek nous. And nous is the Greek word for mind, as understood as cosmic mind, divine mind, and also as cosmic and divine memory. So why does Dante insist on the importance of entering first the waters of Lethe and then the waters of this other part of the river? Because what needs to happen is not only an erasing of the negative memories, but even more importantly, after that has happened, is him to become immersed in the waters of the good mind, the happy mind, the divine mind. Without that, there is no possibility of entering the realm of the third canticle, paradise. So we don't really have, again, enough time to ponder on all the implications of this. But I just wanted to attract your attention once again on the importance of the waters for Dante. We saw the importance of the waters in hell, and how these other waters are so fundamental to his journey. And how the staging of this moment of earthly paradise is really that of an initiatory rite. So there is no entering into the heavens of the divine mind without this preparation. So I think we're going to stop here with regard to Purgatorio, and we'll share now the next PowerPoint, which is the beginning of our sorry. Okay, can you see? Are you seeing the new presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So our third leg, meaning Paradiso. Now, here to begin with is this miniature that you are already familiar with. And in this miniature, there isn't really a whole representation of the heavens. This image focuses much more on the earth and purgatory, and there is just a little reference with the sun and the moon here. But what is stressed here is the roundness, the circularity, the sphericity of not only of the earth, but all of the heavens that surround the earth. So if up to now we've been under the impression that the descent into hell and the ascent of purgatory happened in a kind of vertical straight line, although in two opposite directions, of course, now we are going to have to consider a different figure, okay, rather than the straight line, the spheric or the circular dimension. But in doing so, we also come to realize that both the funnel of Inferno and the mountain of Purgatory are physical dimensions that are circular in nature. And so that progress of Dante in Inferno and then in Purgatorio was linear, but also quite possibly of a spiraling nature. And this idea is going to guide us into our understanding of the journey through through Paradiso. Now, there are many representations also of the third leg, the journey to Paradiso, and this is one of them. Obviously, most of these representations are two-dimensional. And this one in particular is fairly good, fairly legible. But one of the challenges of a two-dimensional representation of Dante's journey and of the Ptolemaic universe is that it really fails to give us, to allow us to see the nature, the spirally kind of nature of the journey. So we will try to supplement this with other views that I think will be more helpful in that respect. Now, what you see here is the earth at the center here. You're familiar with the Inferno and then Purgatorio. And then you see here that there's the atmosphere surrounding the earth. And then you see a number of concentric circles, which are the spheres of the heavens around the earth. So let's get a little bit familiar with this visualization configuration of the Ptolemaic universe. We have here two different versions. One of them, the one to your right, again, like the previous one, is two-dimensional, and essentially it leads the eye from the earth to the four elements. After the earth is water and air and fire, and then to a sequence of heavens up to this last ring where you can see a number of figures, which are the figures of the zodiac, of course. If we look to the left, you're going to see the same idea, but represented in a more three-dimensional perspective. And here you can see that the zodiac is in fact perpendicular to the line of it's not the equator, but of the way in which the sun was understood as rotating around the earth. And here you have another visualization of the same principle with the signs of the zodiac in this last heaven, which was called the heaven of the fixed stars, with a much more detailed representation of the different planetary spheres that were enveloping the earth and somehow connecting the earth to the dimension of the zodiac. So the planets were understood and represented as concentric spheres. And the journey of Dante through the heavens is a journey through the spheres. So it is an ascent, and it is also a journey in which Dante moves outwardly from the earth to the further and further out into the universe. Now, you may ask, was this, so the representation of the universe in these terms is the Ptolemaic understanding of the universe. And in this sense, Dante doesn't invent anything. But what he's telling us is that he has traveled through these different heavens up to the heaven of the fixed stars and beyond that. Was this something that in his times could be considered normal? Were people of his age accustomed to think that the soul would travel through the heavens of the Ptolemaic universe, especially in a Christian concept of the beyond? Well, the short answer is no. The short answer is that this was not a common idea in the Christian world. On the other hand, it was something that was not unusual in that understanding of the universe that I have already mentioned, I think, a couple of times, and which I've called the emanationist, so Neoplatonic understanding of the world. The subject is very complex. Maybe if there is time, we can address it a little bit in the Q&A. But I just wanted to point out the fact that in imagining his journey through the heavens in this way, Dante is creating a dimension of his paradise, which is both narrative and visual, that was not usual for his times. So in the same way that, as I said before, he chose Beatrice and Virgil as his guides. And again, this is something that in our understanding, in our imagination, has been totally canonized because Dante's comedy has become part of the Western canon. But at this time, just the idea, obviously, of saying, well, I traveled through the beyond and my guides were a pagan poet and a Florentine young woman who died very young. Well, in the same way, imagining a journey through the celestial spheres as a way of returning to God was certainly something that required a huge stretch of the imagination at this time. If anything, the Christian mind was more accustomed to understand those concentric spheres as the area through which Lucifer and the devils had fallen from the heavens down to the very center of the universe on earth and into hell. So Dante is suggesting the opposite and complementary perspective, and ascent through the spheres. Now, if we go back to this image that you see on your left, so this two-dimensional representation of the universe, you are going to see that after the heaven of the fixed stars, where the sign of the twins is right here. So after all of the 7 planets, we get to the heaven of the fixed stars, okay? And then here we have another heaven called the primum mobile, the first mover, or the crystalline. And here, then you can see that it's written imperial. So the suggestion that this map gives us is the idea that the Empyrean is a place somewhere at the extreme external margins of the universe. And in fact, if you look at this representation of the universe, which dates from 1493, so quite a number of decades after Dante's passing, you can see that this representation gives us exactly that idea. The idea that God and the Empyrean are embracing somehow the universe, but at the farthest extreme of the universe. And Hildegard of Bingen, who was a mystic of the 12th century, she represented the universe and the cosmos in a number of her images. And being a mystic, she added a dimension here that I like to point out because it will help us, I think, a little bit understand what Dante is trying to point us towards. So as you can see here, the human being is at the center with the earth of the cosmos. And well, in this particular representation, Hildegard is focusing on the mirroring of the microcosm and the macrocosm. But what you can see here is the idea that around the cosmos, there are these two figures. One of them, the red figure, is essentially Mother Nature. And out of her skull comes the figure of Christ. And they are and they are represented in this physical form of embracing the universe. And so this idea of the embrace is quite a bit different from the idea of a God that sits at the outer margins of the universe, somehow in a different heaven, in a different dimension, a different part of the cosmos. The embrace conveys something that is much closer to what Dante will convey in his journey. So Paradiso as a canticle, as the third part of the poem, divided once again in 33 cantos, is structured in such a way that with the first 2 cantos, we have an introduction, and we will look a little bit at what Dante says in that introduction. And then, as you can see, we have the ascent of Dante through the spheres. And the 7 planetary spheres, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, then exiting the 7 heavens of the planetary of the planets to enter the fixed stars, and again the primum mobile, and the last 3 cantos will be devoted to the Empyrean. So from the point of view of the narrative, Dante travels through these different heavens, and we will see a little by little what actually takes place in these heavens. And once again, Dante meets a number of beings, a number of blessed souls in these heavens, and has conversations with them. Beatrice talks to him and explains a number of things. So it's also a very doctrinal canticle, much more than any others than the previous 2. So we will focus on some of encounters and try to understand the main themes of Paradiso. Okay, why don't we stop here for now? And maybe it's time for some questions and answers, and make sure that all of this is a good start for what awaits us in the second part of the evening.
Daniela, I don't know whether you have already answered Diane Clifford from, she's a member of Dante Alighieri Society in Seattle, so welcome from Seattle. And she says, I have a couple of things I would like to hear discussed. The first one is the title. Why is it called The Divine Comedy? And the second one, the popes who appear. Why was each one placed where he was?
Okay, so the commedia is the commedia or commedia. Dante never calls it the Divine Comedy. It's Boccaccio who gave it the title of Divine Comedy. And Dante only makes a couple of passing references in the poem to the fact that he calls it a commedia. And there has been a number of theories as to why he uses this term. But we have no guarantee at all that this would be the title that he wanted to give his poem. So certainly not divine. That was a later addition. And Boccaccio was another of the famous Italian poets. He lived in the 14th century. he had the greatest of admirations for Dante, whom he never met, but considered his teacher. And actually, Boccaccio, the admiration of Boccaccio for Dante was such that he hand copied 3 times the entire Commedia, and we still have those autograph manuscripts by Boccaccio. We don't have any autograph manuscripts by Dante, unfortunately. Boccaccio also wrote a life of Dante, where he tried, on the one hand, to collect all of the information regarding Dante that he could find and have. On the other, he also had a little bit of an agenda. Dante was still an exile, the poem was still considered a problematic, challenging poem, not least because, for example, of the places where the popes were put in the poem. And Dante's children were still alive. And so some of Dante's children and Boccaccio's agenda in commenting on the poem and giving explanations of the poem was also to try to reassure the audience of the orthodoxy of the poem itself. And so this divine adjective added by Boccaccio is possibly also meant as a way to stress this perfectly orthodox understanding of the poem that they wanted to promote. We can then say that perhaps the idea of a comedy is related to the fact that, well, this is a journey that begins in a dark forest and ends in the Empyrean. And so it's a comedy because it's a story that ends well, as opposed to a tragedy, which is a story that ends in disaster. But again, we have no further knowledge in what was Dante's own idea with regard to the title.
There are another couple of questions, one from DM Jones. Would you please confirm what Beatrice chastised Dante for and what changed in his mind?
Mm-hmm. So she tells him that he had been following immagini di ben false, so false images of good. Images of good that do not, she says, fulfill their promises. It is, in a sense, a way of saying, well, you got caught up in worldly matters and essentially you followed physical desires. But it is much more complex and subtle than this. And the subtlety has everything to do with the poem itself. So the poem, the narrative that we have and that we're reading is a sequence of images that takes us with Dante to a transformation of the way in which Dante as a poet and as a human being, and we as readers of that poem, see the world. So in Dante's understanding, everything is an image, absolutely everything. But images are all representations, manifestations of a good, immagini di ben, okay? But some of them lead the mind in certain directions and others lead the mind in other directions. So depending on which images you decide you will follow, you will land in different places of the divine mind. And if you remember the 3 dreams that Dante had, well, those were also images. And we saw that through those 3 images in awakening, Dante landed in very different places of the mind. So for Beatrice, saying that you have followed images of good that led you to get lost is much more complex and subtle than that just saying you were after worldly goods.
We also have a question from Trevor Body. Daniela, some commentators have remarked that Dante's sensualist Inferno is a great deal more fun than its ordered and controlled Paradiso. What do you think?
Well, if there is one thing, one adjective that I would not use for Paradiso is ordered and controlled. because Paradiso is the dimension of the cosmic dance, as we will see. And so it is the place of the free expression of the harmony that exists between the divine, the cosmic, and the human that have come back together. And if there is one thing that Dante aims at doing through the journey in the dimension of Paradiso, is deconstructing the ordered dimension of the human language, which actually acts as a prison for our mind. The human logic is the logic that imbrigliare, no? Closes
reins
in reality into our projections, our understanding of reality. And in this way, humans become totally unable to relate to the much larger and freer dimension in which the divine mind and the liberated souls live. Paradiso is full of souls that one would not expect to find in Paradiso. And that is precisely because they were able to transcend the human logic in that totally creative, divine manner that is already conveyed in that expression, la foresta spessa e viva of the earthly paradise. A living organism is something so much more complex and so much more sophisticated. And so it's an emergent phenomenon as such in continuous motion and in continuous transformation, much more than anything that the human mind can comprehend.
There are another couple of questions, but Diana would like to remind you that you haven't answered yet about the popes.
Okay, now the popes is, it's not something that I can address in 2 minutes here. It is a complex theme of its own, and that would require a whole hour. I would need to go into the specific episodes, look at them, look at the way in which these episodes mirror one another. There is a pope in hell, there is a pope in purgatory, and then there is Saint Peter himself in the 27th of Paradiso. So it is a whole discourse in its own right. I'm sorry.
So Nades is asking, is there a relationship between the geography of Dante's journey and the various manifestations of labyrinths pagan and Christian worship in? And Christian worshipping, sorry.
So the labyrinth, I see a connection between the labyrinth and the city of this. So the city of Lucifer in Inferno. Because Malebolge in particular is a place where the way is often interrupted, and Dante and Virgil need to reach the center of Inferno without getting lost. And in order to do that, they have to count on somehow divine grace to get divine help. Purgatorio and Paradiso do not convey that sense of a labyrinth. Again, for Purgatorio, you cannot really enter the dimension of Purgatorio we saw last time without grace, without being brought up to the door of Purgatory itself. And there are rituals that are required, but I don't see the element of the labyrinth. But it's an interesting point, because certainly labyrinths were very present in medieval churches. So I'll think about it.
There is another question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, could I just ask or note something that interests me? I've studied a bit of T.S. Eliot, and he calls Dante the greatest metaphysical poet. But at the same time, he sees metaphysical poets, the earlier ones, as being trapped in their mind and not like Dante, who gets out of his mind. Have you thought of Dante in terms of the earlier metaphysical poets? Or
Dante is a very physical poet.
yes.
So there is there is a profound love on the part of Dante for the created world. You can see this in all of the images, which are not, they are metaphors, but they are natural mirrorings. And the sense of awe that Dante transmits to us in relation to the beauty of the created universe is something spectacular. So I would say that Dante is a metaphysical poet in the sense that for him, the physical is metaphysical. The physical is intrinsically metaphysical. It's just that we as humans have forgotten how to see the world in those terms. And that's why he and we need to be immersed in the waters of Lethe and in the waters of Eunoe, so that we can recover the good mind, which is this power of resonance between the human mind and the divine mind that will allow us to see the entire cosmos in a metaphysical dimension.
Thank you.
A question by Paul Rennie. What did the church think of the Divine Comedy in terms of its concept of the three domains?
I am not in the mind of the church, so but I can tell you that that there is this paradox whereby the commedia became instantly what we would call a bestseller. The poem was copied, was learned by heart by people of at all levels of the society. We go from, again, poor people who would learn it by heart, the entirety of it, to rich people who would have very precious illuminated manuscripts. In my presentations, I'm showing you some of those miniatures. At the same time, the poem was heavily censored by the church up to the 19th century. So I think there you have a kind of answer to this. And in the 19th century, when the church decided to somehow embrace the poem, that went with a project of commenting on essentially each line of the poem along the lines of what had already been done in the past by starting with Boccaccio and other commentators. But the line here was to do this through a Thomistic reading, so proving that Dante was essentially a follower of Thomas Aquinas. And so you have these commentaries in which whatever Dante says, there is a footnote that says, as Thomas Aquinas says, blah, blah, blah. Interestingly, in those same years, a very conservative Catholic French by the name of Ghrough wrote a book that he actually dedicated to the Pope at the time, in which he says, well, forget all of these commentaries. It's enough to read the text to realize that Dante was a radical heretic, and that therefore you as the Pope should just essentially burn the Commedia and prevent any good Christian from reading it. And I think that this has been pretty much the two alternatives. In the 20th century, there has been the academic reading of Dante scholars who essentially tend to read the poem as the creation of an artist. But again, if we take that route, from my modest perspective, we condemn ourselves to missing out on a lot of the things that Dante tried to convey in this poem. So explaining away all of the complexity of Dante's vision just as being the fantastic inventions of a poem, of a poet, is not a very good solution either. Okay, so maybe we can now begin our ascent through the planetary spheres, and so we can come to the end of the poem. I certainly don't want to leave you without completing the journey, and hopefully we will have a little bit of time at the end to for more questions. So let's begin with Canto 1. And in Canto 1, Dante begins his third canticle with an invocation. And in the first two canticles, the invocations were to the muses. So the muses were the classical guardians of poetry. And here, the invocation is to Apollo himself. And Dante says, asks Apollo, he directly addresses Apollo. He says, nevertheless, you can read the English, veramente quant'io del regno santo, nella mia mente potei far tesoro, sarà ora materia del mio canto. O buon Apollo, all'ultimo lavoro fammi del tuo valor sì fatto vaso, come dimandi a dar l'amato all'oro. And then he says, o divina virtù, se mi ti presti tanto che l'ombra del beato regno segnata nel mio capo io manifesti, vedrami al piede del tuo diletto legno venire e coronarmi delle foglie che la materia e tu mi farai degno. So again, as I mentioned before, we can just explain away many things if we take the perspective of saying, well, he is just a poet using a poetic image. But if even so, Dante as a Christian poet, beginning the celestial leg of his journey, addresses Apollo, the god of the classical god of poetry, and he asks of Apollo the enough energy and enough vision to be able to convey the truthfulness of what he saw. Okay, actually says, if you lend yourself to me so that I might show the shadow of the blessed realm inscribed within my mind. Okay, the shadow, and this image of the shadow, as we will see, comes back at the very end of the poem. But so the question remains, why and how Dante addresses himself to Apollo to receive the strength he needs to write the third canticle. So the narration begins with Dante and Beatrice still in the earthly paradise, and from there they just travel up. How this happens? Dante says essentially it happens because I looked into Beatrice's eyes, and Beatrice herself fixed her eyes into the sun. So it is through this reflection of light that the ascent occurs. How it happens, Dante says, cannot be explained, and he creates a word that didn't exist and doesn't exist in the human language, in the Italian language, trasumanar. Okay, so trasumanar translated here as passing beyond the human. Okay, going beyond the human. This is the essence of the experience of Paradiso, is this trasumanar, passing beyond the human. And he also says cannot be explained in words. But the reference to the experience of Glaucus, who is again a story that comes from the Metamorphosis of Ovid, so from the antiquity, serve as a simile until grace grant you the experience of it. Okay, so Dante says, I have experienced it. Through the poem, I try to convey the experience, and therefore the language, because this is still a poem, the language is the medium through which Dante now tries to convey his own experience and the experience of an inner transmutation that human language is ill-equipped to convey. This is the project of Paradiso. So as you can see, it's also, the Paradiso is also a project in which language itself, as I said before, the human logic that is built into language as a structure meant to convey meaning will be highly challenged. At the end of Paradiso 1, Beatrice, however, tells Dante, now we're heading off to the Empyrean, and she says, to there, as towards a destined place, we now are carried by the power of the bow that always aims its shaft at a glad mark. So somehow, given all of the journey that has occurred up to this point, given the way in which Dante's mind has been transformed by the journey, Dante, Beatrice says, now cannot but reach the Empyrean. This is also to say that Dante has not reached the Empyrean yet, nor is he ready for the Empyrean yet. So even though in the earthly paradise, all of the rituals of the baptism, the waters, and so forth, has prepared him for the experience of the heavens, that whole experience still needs to happen. If, in other words, if Dante were to be put in the presence of what we, through human language, conventionally would call the divine mind, his human mind would be completely shattered, even after all of this journey, which has already transformed his mind radically. So Paradiso is a journey of the mind in this further dimension of acquaintance with the divine mind. And so after this beginning, at the beginning of Paradiso 2, Dante addresses the readers. Dante addresses the readers a number of times through the poem, but this is certainly the longest of all of the addresses and the most interesting and challenging one. So he says, and you can read the English, o voi che siete in piccioletta barca desiderosi d'ascoltar, seguiti dietro a me al mio legno che cantando varca, tornate a riveder le vostre liti. Non vi mettete in pelago, che forse perdendo me rimarreste smarriti. L'acqua ch'io prendo giammai non si corse. Minerva spira e conducemi Apollo, e 9 muse mi dimostran l'orse. Okay, so if you have come up to this point just for the pleasure of listening to a nice, entertaining story, go back home. Don't follow me, because you will lose, from now on, you will lose sight of me and you will be led astray. And then he confirms that Apollo is guiding him. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, breathes on him, and the 9 muses are showing him how to proceed. And then he addresses another kind of readers. He says, voi altri pochi che drizzaste il collo per tempo al pan degli angeli, del quale vivesi qui, ma non sen bien satollo, metter potete ben per l'alto sale vostro navigio, servando mio solco dinanzi all'acqua che ritorna eguale. So Dante is saying, those of you who have an understanding of things that allows you to essentially, I like to think of this image as of traveling on the waters of the oceanic waters with your kayak. So if you can paddle on your own, then you will be able to follow me. Because essentially from now on, we are on uncharted territory, and the course that I will be taking is a course on water. And if you are not able to follow me, again, you will be lost. So interestingly, this is a journey on water. We are traveling in the cosmic waters of the divine universe, which in the Ptolemaic understanding of the universe is made of these concentric spheres. But Dante makes the point that this is cosmic waters. So the first of these concentric spheres, the closest one to the Earth, is the heaven of the moon. And so that's where they first enter. I was going to say land, but of course they don't land there. And a number of figures come close to Dante and Beatrice. And now here we have this new experience, because how do the souls in the heavens, the souls of the blessed, manifest to Dante? Do they have a body? Well, at the beginning, Dante says that he can make out images of human countenances. He says very much like reflections either in water or in glass. So a form of mirroring, as you can see again in this beautiful miniature from a manuscript, sumptuous manuscript of the 15th century. And Dante has a lot of questions for the souls. And the first one, one of the first ones that he has is this. He says to Picarda, tell me, though you're happy here, do you desire a higher place in order to see more and to be still more close to God? So Dante is very innocently reasoning in terms of the human mind. Okay, it's a heaven, it's part of the heavens. We are in paradise, but this is still the lowest of the heavens. So he is asking the souls who manifest there to him, are you happy here? After all, this is the lowest of the heavens. So should naturally wish to be closer to God than you are here. And the souls begin to smile with one another. And Picarda explains the following: Frate, la nostra volontà quieta virtù di carità, che fa volerne sol quel c'avemo ed altro non ci asseta. Se disiassimo esser più superne, foran discordi li nostri disiri dal voler di colui che qui ne cerne, che vedrai non capere in questi giri se essere in carità e qui necesse e se la sua natura ben rimiri. A discourse that is really meant to completely deconstruct the human logic on the basis of divine logic, and which ends by saying, e en la sua volontade è nostra pace. Ella è quel mare, again, an image of the ocean, al quale tutto si muove, ciò che la crea o che natura face. And here, at the end of this, Dante says, I understood. Chiaro mi fu allor come ogni dove in cielo è paradiso. So, even though la grazia del sommo ben d'un modo non vi piove. So the first principle, speaking of order and disorder of Paradiso, is that unity and is the essential criteria, okay? Everything is one, but that oneness is made of infinite difference. And because in the human mind, the oneness and the difference are at the opposite extremes of the logical understanding and representation of things, the first thing that Dante needs to learn is somehow to swim or to paddle in this ocean of oneness, which is made of infinite difference, and in which there is no space for complaint for that difference. Because like in an immense choir, every voice contributes to the unity of the choir only insofar as every voice is different from the other one. Were they equal, the beauty and the complexity and the harmony of that oneness would cease to be. The other thing that Dante understands, I didn't give you the quote, but is that the souls explain all of these souls do not reside in these different heavens. They manifest to Dante in those different heavens, because it is Dante who needs to journey through the heavens. And through that journey, open progressively his mind to the divine mind. The souls of the blessed beings, they all live together in this space, non-space, place, no place, which is the Empyrean, where, as I said before, difference and individuation and individuality is the only way to divine unity. At the beginning of Canto 5, Beatrice gives Dante these 6 lines, which to me are one of the most marvelous summaries of the whole journey through the Commedia. She says to him, io veggio ben, siccome già risplende nell'intelletto tuo l'eterna luce, che vista sola e sempre amore accende. So, because she is endowed with perfect or perfected vision, she, of course, can read and see into Dante's mind. And mind, intellect, intelligence is the highest part of the soul. the soul that contains the spark of the divine mind. So she says, I know, I can see that within you, that spark is present. And once you see it, you will begin to burn with divine love, because that spark is divine love. E s'altra cosa vostro amor seduce, non è se non di quella alcun vestigio mal conosciuto che quivi traluce. So here all of a sudden we have this insight into the nature of the whole poem and of the whole universe. So everything and anything that captures your love, seduces your love, is nothing but a vestige of that divine love light. The only problem is it is mal conosciuto, misunderstood. So once again, it's a different version of what Beatrice had said in Purgatorio 30, immagini di ben seguendo false. It is what we understand and what we make of that understanding that determines our journey. So Dante and Beatrice travels through the heavens. They talk to different souls. We don't have the time, of course, to go through each one of the spheres. After the moon is the sphere of Mercury, where the souls appear to Dante as fish in a pond. And then the souls, the moon of Venus, where the souls are swirling around Dante. And then they come to the heaven of the sun. And from the heaven of the sun, something else intervenes, which is the fact that Dante no longer is able to see any human features, any human countenance in these souls. They only appear to him as lights. And as lights, they come to him to form what we could call some sort of mandalas or figures, geometric figures or natural figures. In the heaven of the sun, they will appear as 3 concentric rings of 12 lights each. And here there is this, again, very complex, very elaborate representation of human wisdom by way of a series of encounter and discourses in which Dante comes to see the dynamics of Christian spirituality of the 13th century, so the Dominicans and the Franciscans, from a completely different perspective from what he would have seen on earth. Then in the following heaven, the heaven of Mars, the souls now appear in the form of a cross. And so the heaven of Mars is a heaven in which are the souls of the martyrs and of the crusaders somehow. So those who have fought for the good on earth that appear to him. And here we are also, as you can see, Paradiso 14:18, we are in the central cantos of the canticle. So in exactly the same way that in Purgatorio and back in Inferno, the central cantos are crucial, something very important happens. Here too, we have a very important encounter. And this is the encounter with Dante's own great-grandfather, Cacciaguida. And so we need to consider, however briefly, this encounter. As you can surmise, by coming in the presence of his great-grandfather, Dante has an encounter here that is very personal in nature. And so Cacciaguida will, first of all, tell Dante the story of his life, a story that Dante had no possible way of remembering or of knowing. As you can see, Cacciaguida lived more than 100 years before Dante, 150 years before Dante. And so it is obviously a narrative that comes from the deep waters of the unconscious. It is a form, obviously, of projection. There is no question about that. But one that will be crucial in helping Dante understand his own standing and his own mission. So Cacciaguida says, I was just a member, regular citizen of the city of Florence back in those very different and somehow blessed days when Florence was still a small town. And then I decided to follow the Emperor Henry Conrad to the Holy Land during the Crusade. So essentially, I became a crusader, and I died as a crusader back there. In what ways is this important for Dante? So Cacciaguida left Florence. He was not kicked out of Florence, but he left Florence, and he left Florence for an ideal, and he sacrificed everything to that ideal. This is the first lesson that Dante is called to identify with. And after this, then Dante has his own questions, and essentially he wants to ask Cacciaguida about his own future. So he says, well, while I was traveling in the beyond, a number of souls told me that something not very nice is about to happen to me. Is that true? So Dante is asking Cacciaguida to confirm whether these prophecies or these announcements of his impending exile are indeed true or not. And Cacciaguida confirms in the clearest possible terms that all of this is going to happen. And he says, tu lascerai ogni cosa diletta più caramente, e questo è quello strale che l'arco dell'esilio pria saetta. Tu proverai, siccome sa di sale, lo pane altrui, e come è duro calle, lo scendere e il salir per l'altrui scale. So, Dante will be exiled, and this exile, which he has resented and experienced as a curse, is in fact the basis for the achievement of his understanding of what life is. Why? Well, because Cacciaguida says, through this journey in the beyond, you have been given the chance to see things from a different perspective. And your mission now is that of putting in writing that vision. Okay? Ma non di men, rimossa ogni menzogna, tutta tua vision fa manifesta. So in the same way that Cacciaguida had found his identity in the project and in the sacrifice of becoming a martyr at the time of the Crusaders, 150 years later, Dante, as his heir, has a different kind of project that he is being asked to take upon himself, very much like a cross. Dante, in another part of the poem, says everyone has to take their own cross to follow Christ. And this is the one project, the one vision that he is asked to fulfill through his life and through his poem. So there is this interesting parallel between the crusade of his forefather and the poem and the vision that the poem translates and shares with the rest of humanity as a sort of different, radically different, yet similar kind of crusade. And so it is in these cantos, in this particular center of the canticle, that Dante receives from his ancestor Cacciaguida the request and the injunction to write this poem, and the revelation of the fact that this journey that he has taken is a journey that is not only for himself, but this is also a journey that then therefore radically transforms Dante's own understanding of what exile is and what it is for. In Paradiso 27, Saint Peter himself, we won't have the time to read that passage, but Saint Peter himself will repeat the same kind of injunction to Dante: write everything that you have seen and everything that has been told to you. So strengthened with this revelation, which of course has many classical antecedents. In particular, we can think of Aeneas when he met his father Anchises in the beyond, and received from Anchises the same kind of reassurance as to the fact that his journey was divinely inspired. Dante moves with Beatrice to the next heaven, which is the heaven of Jupiter. And here the souls appear to him forming, first of all, a writing in the heavens, love, justice, those of you who are judges on earth. And as you can see, terram ends with an M, and this final M takes the shape of an eagle. So the two rounds of the M become the wings, and out of the central stem comes the head of the eagle. And so the eagle is again formed by many different souls. And here we have another glimpse into the way in which the deep individuality of each soul, of the blessed souls, works in interdependence with the individuality of all of the other souls. None of them has lost the memory of who they were in life, what they did, what they accomplished in life, what they saw, what I understood. And yet, in their manifesting for Dante in the heavens, they all can do so by acting together to create something that transcends their own individuality. So here they become the eagle, and Dante asks his questions to the eagle. And the question that he has to ask has to do with divine justice. And it is one of the essentially basic questions that all us human beings want to ask at one time or another in our life. Where is divine justice given all of the injustice that we see in the world? The answer that the eagle gives is a very complex and sophisticated one. Once again, one that we can't go into the detail of it right now. But again, the principle is the one that Dante aims at fostering in the mind of the readers through all of the canticle of Paradiso. Meaning, once again, we ask questions and we follow the logic of the human mind. Divine mind has a dimension of complexity that exceeds that of the human mind. And so it is only by following into that abyss that we can enter into the harmony of the divine, not by remaining on the shore and from that shore try to make sense of what we cannot comprehend. Okay, that's, I think we'll leave it at that for the eagle. And so the following heaven is the heaven of Saturn. And here Dante sees a ladder, again, formed by the souls themselves. And it is through that ladder of souls that Dante will leave the realm of the planetary spheres to ascend to the next level of paradise or of the heavens, meaning the heaven of the fixed stars. But before doing that, Beatrice, now that they have reached the furthest expanse of the planetary spheres, Beatrice says to Dante, turn around and look back. And so, tu sei sì presso all'ultima salute, che tu dei aver le luci tue chiare e acute. E però prima che tu più ti inlei o ti indei, rimira in giù e vedi quanto mondo sotto li piedi già esser ti fei. Sì che il tuo cor, quantunque può giocondo, s'appresti alla turba trionfante che lieta vien per questo etera tondo. So, how does the universe look like from its furthest beyonds or extremes or confines? And Dante says, I turned around to look back, e tutti e sette, so he sees all of the seven heavens, mi si dimostraro quanto son grandi e quanto son veloci, e come sono in distante riparo. So he sees all of the seven heavens, and just down there at the very bottom all of this very complex and beautiful organisms, he sees the earth, which he calls l'aiuola che ci fa tanto feroci, the little threshing floor that so incites our savagery. An interesting comment, and one in which I would like to attract your attention to this paradoxical conjunction of a beautiful threshing floor and the savagery of the human beings who inhabit it. So I've tried to give you a sense of this experience. If you can project yourself into this and see what Dante is trying to convey here. Of course, this is a motif that was also, once again, part of the classical tradition. Cicero, in the Dream of Scipio, had already expressed the same or a very similar kind of experience that Dante is conveying or repeating here. So this heaven of the fixed stars is the heaven of the zodiac, and which in this representation of the world is like a belt that surrounds the heavens. And the fixed stars are those of the zodiac. And interestingly, Dante says that he enters the fixed stars through the constellation of the Gemini, which is, he calls it his own constellation, meaning that was the constellation under which he was born, and the one that somehow to which he had this cosmic connection. So in the heaven of the fixed stars, a number of things happen. Here, Dante has a first vision of the Virgin Mary with the Archangel Gabriel circulating around her and all of the souls of the blessed ones singing around her. Then Dante is tested on faith, on hope, and on love. And interestingly, I should also mention that through the heavens, and especially from here onward, Dante experiences blindness a number of successive times. So blindness because, of course, the light to which he becomes exposed is a light that his eyes and the eye of his mind cannot sustain. And therefore, the reaction is that of blindness, which corresponds to the number of faintings that occurred, for example, in Inferno, as you remember. But through the experience of blindness, which in this particular case is rather long and sustained, Dante responds when he's tested on love. He responds to Saint John while he is unable to see anything. But every time out of this experience of blindness, the sight is returned to him. And this sight is also an opening of his eyes mind to a higher dimension of understanding. So out of blindness comes new insight. I should say that the in Canto 26, the experience in the heaven of the fixed stars ends with Dante meeting encountering the soul of Adam. And it is a very moving encounter, all the more so if we realize, when we come to realize that this encounter with Adam happens in Canto 26 of Paradiso, which corresponds in Inferno with Dante's encounter with Ulysses. And again, maybe in another time, in another situation, we will be able to talk a little bit about these magnificent correspondences between the three canticles that lend the poem a whole other level of complexity. The heaven of the fixed stars is the last of the heavens, but it is not. Beyond the fixed stars, there is another dimension, which is called the primum mobile in Latin, or crystalline. The primum mobile is the first mover. So it is the divine energy that sets the whole universe into motion. And in this primum mobile, something happens to Dante that we need to try to understand now. So let's go back for a minute to the representation of the universe as I showed you at the beginning. So as you can see here, cielo stellato, okay, the fixed stars here. And then after that is the primum mobile. And as you can see here, this is a representation of Brunetto Latini's Tresor, a book that Dante knew well. We have the Empyrean with a, as you can see, a representation of the 9 angelic choirs. So in this understanding of the universe, as we saw before, God and the Empyrean and the angels and the blessed souls are at the outer extreme of the universe. But this is not what Dante says. He says in Canto 28, he says, as soon as I entered the primum mobile, I saw a luminous point. He will actually again go blind in looking at that point. And he says, and that point was surrounded by 9 circles. So if you look on the right, this is what he sees. A center, a luminous center surrounded by 9 circles. And Beatrice will explain that these are the 9 orders of the angels that are circling around God. This was, of course, in itself, a traditional way of representing God and the angels. Here on the right, you have again Hildegard of Bingen's representation of the 9 orders of angels around God, and here on the left-hand side is that very famous Doré representation of the same vision of the same thing. But so the point is that there is a discrepancy between the representation of the universe that we see here. So from the Earth moving out through the planetary spheres to the fixed stars, the primus mobile, and then out there, the Empyrean, and this other understanding where God is at the center and the angels are surrounding him. So what is happening here is a shift in perception whereby what was initially experienced as the furthest extremity of the universe, the Empyrean, or God, becomes the very center. So you have this reversal of perspective. And this reversal of perspective is really the center of the experience of paradise that Dante wants to convey in his canticle. So how does this shift in perspective occur? How can we understand it? I think we can try to understand this if we take the view that Dante has been spiraling into the heavens, spiraling out of the heavens to the furthest reaches of the universe, only to then realize that through his journey, he was in fact spiraling in back to the center. But the whole point of the journey is that this journey begins in a center, which is the center of the universe, of the Ptolemaic universe, the Earth, at the whose very center, by the way, is Lucifer stuck in that center, spiraling. So he has been spiraling down to that center in order to then spiral out through purgatory, and then spiraling out again in the heavens up to the furthest reaches of the universe, to then spiral back again through the angelic orders into the center of the universe, which is not the earth, but God. And so I personally like to see this in the terms of the Fibonacci mathematical sequence, and the way in which I see this is really this insight into the nature of the universe, which is inscribed as a Fibonacci sequence in everything in the universe, from the tiniest thing to the galaxies. And so this is an insight that Dante, in fact, has through this journey. And I think this is the kind of insight that he's asking us to follow him into. So if God and the Empyrean is not a place out there, what is it? As a matter of fact, already in Paradiso 22, Beatrice had explained that the Empyrean is not a place. She says that sphere is not in space and has no pole. And in Paradiso 30, she will say, from matter's largest spheres, we have now reached the heaven of pure light, light of intellect, light filled with love, love of true good, love filled with happiness, a happiness surpassing every sweetness. So again, language, poetic language, is trying to convey the experience of a dimension of the universe which permeates everything, contains everything, and is not a place or a space or a time. So the last three cantos of the poem are trying to convey this experience. The first way in which Dante experiences this is through the vision of a river of light. And the river will then transform into the vision of a rose, and Dante will contemplate the beauty of this rose. And the moment he turns around to tell Beatrice how filled he is with this transcending experience, very much like it had happened in Canto 30 of Purgatorio, he turns around, Beatrice is no longer there next to him. She has completed her role of guide with him, and now we have another presence, another figure, the figure of Saint Bernard. And Bernard will be Dante's guide in this last experience of paradise. So we have this beautiful, beautiful moment of praise of Beatrice before Dante moves on to the next experience of the Empyrean and of the divine with Saint Bernard. So Bernard, we could say, shows Dante around in that dimension of the celestial beauties where all of the souls of the blessed are mingled with the angels. And then there is this prayer of Bernard to the Virgin, where Bernard asks the Virgin that Dante be allowed to have the final vision of the divine. So Canto 33, the last part of Canto 33 is really this extraordinary attempt at conveying in images and in poetic rhymes the inexpressible of that experience. And there are three successive moments in this that are conveyed through a series of images in which Dante keeps saying that the vision fails and then opens up to higher dimensions. So in the first one, he says, all this was like a dream. And from that dream, now all of the images are like those of a dream disappearing. And so is the snow beneath the sun unsealed, and so on the light leaves beneath the wind, the oracles of the Sibyl wrote were lost. Again, another references to the classical tradition of the oracles, along with the final vision of the Christian dimension of the universe. The second vision is that it's a beautiful vision of the universe that is like a book where all of the pages of the books are scattered through the universe. And yet, even as he sees that, Dante manages to see the nodo, la forma universal di quel nodo, like the book bound in itself. So we're going back to this idea of God as the center of the universe, in the same way that a book is bound and closed in itself, and yet it opens up to contain and expand the expanse of the universe. So the experience of this vision is one that fades away from his memory, and yet paradoxically, it is the one that he is writing in these verses. And the last final part of this vision is the one where he says, quella circolazione che si concetta pareva in te come lume riflesso, dagli occhi miei alquanto circonspetta, dentro da sé del suo colore stesso mi parve pinta della nostra effigie, perché mio viso in lei tutto era messo. So the Trinity appears to him in 3 circles, but at the same time also in this image of a human countenance in which he can see himself and understand himself. A last attempt at understanding fails in the same way that the attempt at squaring the circle fails. And yet at the same time, this failing at is the process of coming close to that experience. And so the final image that Dante gives us to conclude the poem is this extraordinary understanding. All'alta fantasia qui mancò possa, so there are no more words that can be used to express this, ma già volgea il mio disio e il velle, sì come rota ch'igualmente è mossa, l'amor che muove il sole e l'altre stelle. It's essentially an impossible sentence to translate in English because the subject of the sentence is the love that moves the sun and the other stars, which Dante, of course, puts at the end of the poem as like a seal to the poem. But that same love is also the love that causes him to revolve around like all of the sun and all of the other stars. And so maybe the last thing that we can say is that the realization that Dante has in the end is that he has become a speck in the universe, like one of the other stars, and he understands like that divine love is moving him in the same way that it moves everything else that is alive. And I would like to conclude by quoting this sentence of Thomas Berry, who has been a great mystic and also a great reader of Dante, when he says, the excitement of life is in the numinous experience wherein we are given to each other in the larger celebration of existence, in which all things attain their highest expression, for the universe, by definition, is a single gorgeous celebratory event. I think I am 3 minutes past.
Thank you, Daniela. This has been a wonderful journey all together through Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise now. And
but
we have many questions
to the end
from the audience. Thank you so much. So I don't know whether you would like to start asking questions, or if I go through the ones that have already been sent through the chat. There was one by Diane Clifford who were asking if what kind of translation, English translation you are using.
Here, I've been using Mandelbaum translation, which is the one that you can read on the Digital Dante website that is on the
Suggestions, the reading suggestions.
Yes, yes. And there are many, way too many translations. So to a certain extent, it's a matter of preference. And no translation is perfect also because of the challenges of translating Dante. But over the years, I found that Mandelbaum does a pretty good job. So it's so far is one of my favorites.
And Dave is asking, do you think Dante was explaining or exploring?
What?
He hasn't specified, so
Okay.
I don't.
Okay. Well, I think he's explaining his exploration and exploring his explanations.
It's a good answer. Why is Apollo a pagan god in paradise, but Virgil is not permitted? Paul Rani is asking.
Hoping that someone would raise the issue of Virgil, because when Dante reaches the eagle and he asks about divine justice, of course, Dante's heart is bleeding for Virgil. And when he says, what kind of justice is this? It is obvious that in his mind, he has the question of Virgil's salvation. And Dante doesn't give us any footnotes, as I said, to his poem. So it is up to us to read the poem. And I think it is no coincidence that the question of Virgil's ultimate destination remains unanswered, because Dante, I think, really wants each one of us to answer that question. And my reading, maybe as a Jungian, is that the answer we give will depend on the kind of choices that we make. And that process, just the process, the agony of deciding what kind of answer we want to give, will be a journey in itself for each one of us. So I'm not going to tell you what I think.
And Mary-Ellen Belfiore is asking, how did Dante get the image of globes and circular planets? And she's saying Galileo is way later.
Well, the notion that the planets were circular and that the Earth was circular had been part of the common knowledge of humanity since antiquity. So the Ptolemaic universe is not a universe in which the land is flat, the Earth is flat. So the sphericity was actually not only part of the cosmology, but the symbolic implications of the spheres as a manifestation of the divine were very present, not only to Dante, but to humanity, had been present and well known to humanity for thousands of years.
Eloise Carbone is asking, is the prima mobile separate from the unity?
The primum mobile is pure energy. So it's the divine energy that that sets the universe in motion. Eloise, you can unmute yourself and I can hear your lovely voice.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much. You've been totally wonderful. So we've been texting here and chatting, but so in one of the diagrams, it looks like God is separated from circular energy. And so it makes me think of the question as whether we are God, as in Advaita knowledge and teachings, or whether we are separate from God. And I'm wondering what Dante thought.
Well, the shift that occurs in the primum mobile is really, I think, the shift of this transformation of Dante's vision, that instead of seeing God as separate and outside of the universe, he has to come to the realization that God is that very center, at the very center of the universe. And the universe is God, and God is the universe.
And we are God.
And we are God. And this journey of Dante into God, this is one of the things, you know, where I think the Orthodox Catholic tradition will shy away from this, but this is there is that line that I read where Dante says, Beatrice says, che tu più ti in lei. Well, you can read it, che più tu ti in dei. So you become God. And this is the journey of the recovery of the divine on the part of Dante. Dante could not be granted the divine vision or the vision of the divine if there was not a process of deification that takes place. But so what does this process of deification mean? And why is Dante given the mandate to write a poem about this? Because coming to the realization of the divinity of the human being implies coming to the realization of the divinity of the universe. If the whole universe is contained in the divine mind, then the whole universe is divine. And Dante says, ma già come volgea il mio desio il velle, sì come rota che ugualmente gosse. So the point is to become part of that cosmic dance. Nothing more and nothing less, because that cosmic dance is God.
So to become through understanding that you are. Thank you.
You are, and everything is.
Yes.
And Archibald is asking, how long was it after Dante completed the Commedia to his death?
We don't know, but what Boccaccio tells us is that when he died, the last 3 cantos were nowhere to be found. And that one of Dante's sons had a dream as to where those last cantos laid hidden. It's an interesting story. But so the idea is that he probably finished shortly before dying. There is even someone who says that Canto 32 is so boring that maybe it's not Dante.
There are so many comments. I mean, so many congratulations and so many thank you for what you have done, this tour de force through all these 4 episodes. And we can only thank you again for your time and for your experience and for your explanations. And someone has already suggested that you should do something on Boccaccio next time. So,
okay. Well, thank you.
If there are no more, yes, there is a question, Ali.
Hi, it's me again. I just wondered how humility works, fits into, I see humility as knowing your potential, I think, your place in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see humility?
Humility is the door through which to enter the experience of purgatory. If you remember, Purgatorio 1, when they meet Cato, and then Cato tells Virgil to go and wash Dante's face with you, and to be girted with a rush. So there is no access to the process without humility. And I think that Dante was aware enough of language and all of the interconnectedness of things that he clearly saw the connection between humilis, humus, and homo.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
If there are no more questions, I think we should let Daniela go. And
I wish we could all be in the same room. That would be so wonderful, but maybe there will be a time when this will be possible.
I'm sure there will be a time. So let's think positive, and we will meet you again soon on January the 10th for the book launch of Chef Claudia Fraschini and her recipes inspired by the Divine Comedy. So again on these same Zoom screens. And thank you again, Daniela, and thank you all of you for being here with us for these 4 episodes.
Thank you, Daniel.